Hi, this is Elisabeth Hancock, host of the Great Awakening podcast. So, this week, as promised, we're going to be looking at bloodlines and, well, some bloodlines, because I think that there are many bloodlines on our planet. I think that we are a mix of many different races, species, some off planet, some maybe inner Earth, not all from this planet. And we can see with our own DNA that 97% of our DNA is not from this planet. It's not terrestrial, which is showing us that much of our DNA, 97% of our DNA, actually comes from somewhere else. Now, we talk about ETs, we talk about space, but I'm not too sure that space is exactly what we think it is. So when I talk about off planet, I'm very open to concepts like the ice wall, under the earth, these sorts of things. And I think when I talk about humans, I'm talking about the humans that live on the surface of the planet. So let's start by looking at the indigenous people, because the indigenous people are, I think, the original inhabitants of this planet, of this world, and they can trace their family lines, their ancestral lines back to 75, 80, 85,000 years ago. The Hopi tribe can trace their ancestral lines back 80,000 years ago. And this is because of something that they call a Suma Day, which is equivalent to 1,000 years. And they say that they've had 80 of these. So, of course, they track time in a different way than we do, or the Western world does. And they can trace their family lines, ancestral lines back to 80,000 years ago. And they also say that they used to live under the earth, and they went under the earth when a great catalytic event took place and their world was wiped out. When it came time for them to emerge back into the surface world again, the Hopi met with who they call Masor, who's the caretaker and creator of the earth. And they promised him that they would help take care of the earth or the world as a trade-off for staying. So they were able to stay on the earth. They were not wiped out. This is something which comes up with many of the indigenous tribes. They talk about the world, the earth being wiped out, various catalytic events wipe out the earth. But the indigenous people are able to survive, and they come back and they reseed the planet again. The Hopi tribe talk of being helped by the ant people, and these ant people are the ones that took them underground. And although many researchers refer to these ant people as being industrious, hardworking people, and the ant is used as a metaphor, there are some people, for example, a military whistleblower called JP, who talks about having actually met the ant people, the people that live under the ground. He claims to have met them, and he described them as a humanoid figure, a bit like us, but with two antenna strands coming off the top of their heads instead of hair. Now, interestingly, these ant people also come up in Egyptian and Greek myths as well. And although we don't know what they look like from these Egyptian and Greek myths, we do have some Hopi cave art depicting these people. And again, it's this same look with the two antennae coming off. The Hopi legends also talk of several layers of underground cave systems populated by at least two species of non-humans near Phoenix, Arizona in the US. And other myths and stories also say that people went into the earth after wars, cataclysms, and other periods of instability, which, considering the age of our planet, makes a lot more sense than our current understanding. So it does seem that there are many different species, races, civilizations living under our planet, and we possibly do not understand quite how that works. But I also do feel that there are people living under the earth, and they've gone there during catalytic events, during times of unrest, and it would make sense that one would look for somewhere to hide until the surface was available to repopulate again. The Hopi records also talk of flying shields And these are one of 10 items given to the humans by the gods. And the Hopi Indians are very particular about keeping their stories accurate. And they claim to have passed down these stories for 80,000 years. As I said, they use this 1,000-year calendar system called a Sumadi, and say that there have been 80 of these since they migrated north and settled in America. They also state that they were the first tribes to arrive there, but that more tribes came later on once the ice had melted in the north. They claim that their ancestors are from the Pleiades and refer to their ancestral homeland as Tiami, arriving in America after a great flood destroyed their island in the Pacific Ocean. We know that the Pacific Ocean is where Lemuria was based, and the Atlantic Ocean is most likely where Atlantis was based. So these Zuni, who are part of the Hopi Indians, they also tell us of these flying shields that they call katsinam, and people use these shields to fly around, which interestingly, flying shields are also mentioned in the Indian texts as well. Whilst the Cree people, who are also part of the Hopi Indian tribe, they state their ancestors arrived on Earth in spirit form and then became humans. Now, we've talked about this before because spirit form may be that their bodies were shining, that they were light, and this may be because their bodies were actually in a higher density, and therefore they didn't have the density that we have in this third density realm. Maybe that they were fifth density or maybe sixth density, and therefore shined and gave off more of a shine about them. We have the shining helpers of Horus, and we also have the shining people who are talked about in the Adam and Eve, the book of Adam and Eve, where they are talked about shining people or couples who are shining, and as they descend further down into the valley, they actually start to become more dense looking. And this is sort of telling us that they seem to be dropping down, descending into higher states of physical matter, if you like. So we could say that these are people from a higher dimension, a higher density, a different realm, whatever it may be. But certainly this shining human form comes up quite a lot in our texts. Another interesting tribe, indigenous tribe, are the Dogon tribe. And these are very famous for knowing where the Sirius star system is. And nobody quite knows why they would know where this star system was. They talk about having been visited for hundreds of years by an off-planet species that they call the Numu. And these species are said to come from Sirius B. They describe them as amphibian-like people with green skin that, like chameleons, can also change their color. And they've been honoring these Numu for a very long time, as can be evidenced by the many ritual masks that they have hanging in their tents, which they change the style every 60 years. They describe the Numu as a fish, snake, or serpent-like humanoid with a forked tongue, pointed teeth, and apparently some of the Dogon women also file their teeth to sharp points to emulate them, and also have tattoos on their bodies in the same place that these Numu people are supposed to have tattoos or markings on their bodies. These Numu are also supposed to have no ears, red eyes, horns, and an elongated skull, and they don't have any hair. They apparently came here hundreds of years ago because their planet was dying, and they required a water planet to live on. They apparently started to do genetic experiments on a primate or mammal or hominid that they found on Earth. And these genetic experiments started off well, and they wanted to create an androgynous self-fertilizing Numu, which was the female of their species. However, they also had to make a male of the species as well, because although they are mostly self-fertilizing, apparently, occasionally, they do need to practice physical intercourse in order for a new genetic material to be then passed down. They created this second masculine being, which was a single-sexed being, and it was born with more Earth DNA than Nomo DNA, and thus without the capacity for conscious genetic memory. which meant that it was essentially mortal, and it could not house their consciousness or pass the consciousness or soul down when they shed a body. According to the Dogon tribe, this created a human known as the jackal. And this was a male or a masculine who was alone from birth and who was unable to connect to the Numu spirit or the animals in the way that the Numu could. Apparently, the Numu say that the birth of this single-sexed being, devoid of a soul or a spirit, created many problems for them, and they spent considerable time trying to undo the genetic changes without much success. This went on to result in the human being who lost immortality and the soul memories of their water planet. The Numu realized that they had not taken into account the spiritual aspects of their DNA and had only worked with the physical earth DNA, which was not spiritually evolved enough to be able to take on the role of consciousness or spiritual avatar. This then resulted in essentially the human being who did not have the connection to immortality, was not able to pass consciousness or soul down through the human body, the avatar body, and could not pass the soul memories of their water planet down, which defeated their objective. They were looking for a planet, a species where they could live, a water planet, but also a species that they could pass their genetic memories down onto, which they were not able to do with the human being, apparently. So if we look at the Aborigines, the Australian Aborigines, they also say that they are the descendants of a god and a goddess. And the Aborigines of Australia go back even further. They go back maybe as far back as 85,000 years ago. And what's so interesting about the Aborigines is they are the oldest single line traced lineage on the planet. Taking their beginnings to around 85,000 years ago, they talk of watchers or lookers, as the Hopi call them, the likeness of which we can see etched onto the rocks in the Australian outback, dated to 5,000 years ago. And according to their legend, the watchers physically arrived here from Orion, giving advanced knowledge which caused many problems for mankind because man or humans were not ready for this knowledge. This story is mirrored in other places as well, such as in the Book of Enoch, in the biblical accounts, the early Babylonians, the Maya, the Zulu, and many Native American tribes all talk of being helped by off-planet civilizations. But interestingly, the Jewish and Christian religious writings decided to leave these references out. So these Western religions do not have these references to being helped by off-planet civilizations, even though the Book of Enoch talks all about these extraterrestrial off-planet visitors that came to our planet hundreds of years ago. They chose to leave them out. Now, one of the interesting things about the Aborigines is that there is a cemetery that goes back 10,000 years, and it's an Aboriginal cemetery. And when the bones have been looked at, it shows that these were Homo erectus type people, which is very interesting because not only was Homo erectus supposed to have died out quite a long time ago, but it also shows that this Homo erectus also made its way into the Australian Aborigines as well. And the Homo erectus, as we know, can actually be traced back up to 2 million years ago. Now, if we look at the indigenous tribes of New Zealand, so these are called the Maori, and we know that when the Maori arrived in New Zealand around 12th century, there were actually red-headed, very tall red-headed people already living there. And these are the Waitaha, and they talk of their descendants being the Urukehu. And interestingly, the Urukehu is the actually original name for Iran, which gives us that link to Mesopotamia. But interestingly, the Urukehu are shown or depicted, always talked about as being advanced people who are great navigators and astronomers. And they were mapping out the new landmass in the Pacific after the Great Flood. We know that the Great Flood was 9,600 BC. And after this, they then sailed around the globe, mapping out the new landmass. And the Urukehu, they were tall, they had red hair, they had light eyes, they had white skin. And interestingly, out of the many different New Zealander tribes, 15 exhibit this red hair trait, this red hair, light eyes, paler skin after having their DNA tested. It showed that not only do they come from the Middle East, Egypt, the steppe, Madagascar, Central America, but that the Pacific Islanders hold the DNA of an unknown extinct human species. And we know from speaking with one of the Waitaha grandmother elders that the Urukehu lived exceptionally long lives, possibly even 700 years in each generation. And this doesn't really make any sense until you look at the Sumerian kings list, the Indian Egyptian stories, and the Book of Enoch, which also talk of kings and semi-divine people living tremendously long lives. People who were linked to the heavens and the gods of the sky. The Waitaha state that the Urukehu used to come here in physical form, offering spiritual teachings, knowledge of healing, civilization, and maps of the cosmos to the Waitaha. But then something changed and they stopped coming in physical form. And now the Waitaha connect with them spiritually during ceremonies instead. There is also genetic evidence to show that some of the Waitaha people can be dated back to 2500 BC in Wales, and that the Easter Islanders are also a close genetic match to the people of Wales, Native Americans, and the people of the Basque in northern Spain. So the people of the Basque are interesting because they are the people that have the highest amounts of Rh negative in their bloodline. And they also appear to have the elongated skull in their bloodline as well. So Huna Flash of the Maori in New Zealand refers to the first land of Lemuria going back as far as 600 million years ago. And other accounts say 20 million years ago. But it seems to have been millions of years. We seem to have been here, or humans have been here for millions of years. And also the Indian Vedas say the same thing. They say that we've been here for 4 million years. And for various reasons, we keep being wiped out. Various catalytic events, meteors, whatever it may be, we keep being wiped out. And the survivors of these catalytic events are the ones who then go on and repopulate the earth again. And we can see this in stories like Noah, where Noah and his sons go on and repopulate the earth. But we also know from the indigenous tribes that they are the ones who are repopulating the earth as well. We also have evidence of many artifacts and also human skeletons going back hundreds of million years, where we have these skeletons, these artifacts that have been found in untouched rock strata. And it is rock strata or coal that is dated back to millions of years ago. Now, I think that we do know that radiocarbon dating is not correct. However, for these skeletons or ancient artifacts, in some cases, very advanced technology to have been found in rock strata, untouched rock strata, buried so deep within our earth, it does show that this is going back a very long time, or maybe that there have been some sort of mud floods or events where meteors have come here and impacted the earth so much that it has caused the land mass to be disrupted, and therefore we're not able to get the true carbon dating of these rock strata. They're also not accepted by archaeologists, which again is very interesting. Why would we not accept certain things that are coming up in our timeline, in our history? Why would we discount them? Why would we not use them to learn and understand more about our history? The Japanese legends also say that they are the product of a god and a human. And the noble bloodline of Akagiri Yataro is said to have begun with his mother mating with a shape-shifting serpent. He himself was said to have scaly chapped skin, which ran down the lineage even to Saburo Ogata, who was a documented member of the Genji clan. Said to be proud of his scaly skin, he felt that it showed that he had dragon blood, and thus was from a noble bloodline. In my opinion, this shows us that the Japanese descended from what we would possibly call a reptilian humanoid species. The Indian Vedic texts are also full of tales of gods imparting knowledge and wisdom to us, flying around in vimyanas, conducting sky battles, and essentially helping us. And read on their own, they sound like fantastical tales of heroes and supernatural beings. But if we compare them to other unrelated cultures, it does make us feel that there's too much correlation here and there's too much similarity between different cultures. The Vedas and the Book of Enoch all talk about these flying craft. And in India, texts speak of metal cities in the sky and flying ships, complete with measurements that show a stereotypical spacecraft. So both in the Vedas and the Book of Enoch, people have even made up these measurements, and they've actually created typical spacecraft looking craft. So we can see, why would these be in religious books? Why would these be in holy books? What is it that we're seeing in here? And it's obviously history, tales from our past, and things that have been passed down in these ancient texts, which we have now misunderstood and put into religious documents. Again, the Indian Vedas talk about how as each world is destroyed, it's then created again. And the demigods and goddesses create more physical bodies to house the souls, the different souls coming here from different parts of the multiverse. The Vedas state that the Earth is currently 155.5 trillion years old. And interestingly, because of superclusters and clusters of galaxies, we can tell that our universe is older than 13.5 billion years. According to the Vedas, all physical bodies are conscious beings made up of three elements: physical form, spiritual essence, and consciousness. One of the most interesting tribes are the Dropa people from Tibet, living in the mountains between Tibet and China. And the Tibetan tribe, the Dropa, state that they are descendants of short greys who crashed into the mountains between Tibet and China 12,000 years ago. And there have even been apparently sarcophagi containing several thin humanoid bodies with very large heads, plus texts that talk of what happened have been found in caves also in the mountains. And in fact, the original Dropa tribe still exists and live in the mountains, and they're said to be very short, between 2 foot and 3 foot tall. They contain more of this grey or extraterrestrial DNA, and as such have taken on more of their distinctive features, with larger heads, brownish skin, thin bodies, large eyes, and are short. And according to current thinking, these people over a 12,000 year period then began to travel down the mountains into Tibet one side and China into the other, and essentially added their genealogy into both countries, adding their brownish skin, their round heads, their lack of facial and body hair, and short stature. We know that the original inhabitants of China were actually Caucasian people, known as the Trocharians, but possibly were other races or species as well. And these were not a few people. These were a community of people who were living in this area. They were tall, they had red hair, white skin, and there's even a man called the Churchin man. His body has been found wearing tartan trousers. Now, this is an interesting link because the tartan trousers actually come from the Tartarians. And we can see that the Tartarians lived around the Russian, Mongolian, Chinese area, and that they then spread out from there. So were these Tartarians the original inhabitants, and then these Dropa people, the Greys, characteristics start taking on more and more precedence in that area? The Chinese authorities apparently have denied all knowledge of these texts that have been found in the mountains with the sarcophagi containing these thin humanoid bodies. And they state that this is not the case and that these were not found there. However, Eric von Daniken actually took photos of these texts and published them in his book. So we can see that this is true, unless this is even further misinformation. Who knows? So coming back to the different bloodlines, we've got the Chinese. The Chinese history talks of the first humans being created by Nukwa, an ancient goddess that created the royal bloodlines, the Chinese royal bloodlines. Whilst we have the oldest book in China, the Yi King, which is said to be 5,000 years old, And it says that dragons and humans used to live peacefully and even married each other. Now, we have the dragon or serpent people coming up in India as well, with the Nagas. And again, they also state that the Nagas used to live alongside humans, that they used to marry, interbreed, and this was a normal part of their existence. So, who are these dragon people? Who are these serpent people, which we see coming up in so many of their images? And lastly, we have a more recent bloodline, which is the Slavic, the Slavs. And there is some research to show that the original Slavs come from Tau Ceti. Interestingly, Tau Ceti is in one of the solar systems from which Earth scientists have managed to pick up a signal, indicating that there may be life there. At the very least, it shows that there are other exoplanets with an atmosphere in that system as well. The link between Tau Ceti and our planet actually comes via Eisenhower. President Eisenhower apparently had an ongoing agreement with the people of Tau Ceti, and they formed an agreement to send infants here to help raise the consciousness of the planet, because humanity was not ascending fast enough. And what they were doing was they were sending infants here in craft. Apparently, we've got the MJ12. So the scientists of MJ12 were people who were appointed or assigned to research the extraterrestrial link or extraterrestrial species, and they were researching the UFO theories. And one of the things that they investigated was a UFO crash that occurred on the 25th of March, 1948, where 12 humanoids were discovered inside cryogenic tubes. The report stated that there were 3 adults and the rest were infants. There was 1 adult male and 3 6-month-old infants who were rescued, and the rest died. The adult male was a member of the Galactic Federation, and he lived on Earth for a year and even met with President Eisenhower before he was repatriated to his own planet in August 1949. The reports don't specify, but it's assumed that the infants that survived were left here to mingle with the rest of humanity, adding advanced DNA into our gene pool and helping to raise the levels of consciousness on the planet. Could this be where new blood types, such as the golden blood, comes from an off-planet dropped-off baby? Or does it come from somewhere else? Interestingly, author and healer Jerry Wills has discovered that he also came from the planet Tau Ceti and was a dropped-off baby himself. He certainly has a larger stature than the rest of us, has a sort of blonde, strawberry blonde hair, and also possesses much stronger healing and psychic abilities, which he now travels around the world healing people with these abilities. But what is more interesting is that there is some research to show that the Tau Ceti are actually the original Slavs of Russia. And these Tau Ceti, if they are tall, with strawberry blonde or maybe red hair, blonde hair, with lighter eyes and whiter skin, then this does sound like the Russian Tartarians. And Russia, or around the Caucasus Mountains, is another area like Mesopotamia where DNA just appeared and we don't know where it came from. And lastly, we've also got the Mesopotamian region of our world, where again we have that DNA that just showed up. So many genetics can be traced back to this area of Mesopotamia. And interestingly, this is the same area where the Sumerian tablets talk about these Anunnaki gods who arrived here from a different planet. They came to Earth, they genetically created the human species to be a worker species for them, to help them mine gold, to run their farms, to grow their food, to make their alcohol. And this is what they say, or how they say the human species arose, that they genetically altered or created whatever hominid they found on the planet at that time. And then this led then to the human species that we have today. So these are all the different bloodlines. I have no doubt that there are many more bloodlines to talk about, but this is the research that I currently have found at the moment. So in the future, we'll talk about some other bloodlines. We'll talk more about the Anunnaki, but there is a lot of information already online about the Anunnaki. And we'll also look at some timeframes, but we'll also be looking at the human hybrids that we have on our planet from the different species that we could say off-planet species, including the greys. Okay, so that's all for this week, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch up with you next week. All right, take care. Bye.